Hello everyone, Jay here from Jade Productions. I am back in the next video of our Robotech role-playing series, and in this video, which is intended for both GMs and players, we are talking about skills and skill challenges. So, consulting the Core Macross book, the skills and skill challenges begins in the second chapter, beginning on page 58. Where the several types of skill challenges are gone over and how you go about making a skill challenge and how those are possibly resolved and how they're conducted as well. So, there are several kinds of challenge types, and these are going to be very familiar to GMs and players of other systems. So, first, there's combative challenge types. These are typically where you're doing some sort of opposed rolling, or you're doing something that is in opposition to another player or character, whatever it may be. Some of the examples given in the book might be, physical combat, or you're playing chess, or you're hacking a AI that is actively opposing you. Either way, it is an opposed skill challenge, essentially. Then there are static skill challenges. And so static skill challenges are pretty much for situations where it's, you must succeed at the task, but there's nothing opposing you. It's simply that there is something that you need to overcome. This can be like climbing a wall, cooking food, repairing damage. This is something where there is no active living force or any force opposing you. It is a static challenge. And then there are basic challenges, and these are easy to succeed at, and they might not take a roll, and you might consider to beat them eventually, or the GM might require you to make a roll, but they can be done without stress and with making a few mistakes. So, when it comes to basic stuff, you might typically not call for a player to roll. However, for a player to roll, you might call one anyway, and there's various examples of just simple basic challenges. Might be anything from a quick look around to just them asking the occasional question of, hey, what's in here? And you just tell them. No observation stuff required. It's purely just looking around. Okay, this is what you've got. There's nothing hidden here. Static challenges are, as we went through those examples. Now, on a side note for combative challenges, in that they are opposed by another creature. Now, for this, you may choose not to roll a combative challenge as the GM. So, for example, normally you would think an opposed roll is like, your player does a roll and you do a roll, and the person with the most successes succeeds. That's one way of doing it. The other way is that the GM could just freely set, like, hey, this opposing force presents this level of difficulty, and just provide a difficulty number. Regardless of what kind of static or combative or basic skill test you're calling for, or is being conducted, either way, the GM examines the situation, and they then decide on a difficulty number. And this difficulty number is basically the number of successes required to beat the challenge, essentially. And there are various kinds of states you can end up in. And so to give GMs that of a leeway, because the idea is not in Robotech, and not in role-playing generally, to just hard-no slap down your players when they try to do something. No. You want them to succeed as a GM, because you want to tell your story. And this system does that, by presenting you multiple ways that a failure could be used to drive the story. Because a dice roll, typically for a challenge, should only be called for when it will affect the story. So, there's several examples here of different kinds of failure states based on what might occur for the GM to apply. So there's partial successes where, a partial success might make subsequent checks easier, or they might only get limited information, they might only get a partial of what they need. It's pretty self-explanatory. Then there's hard failures. Now, hard failures is your classic, boom, no. You fail, no more attempts can be made, you suck, go home. I'm going to admit that's a very rare one that I personally don't use very often, because again, I like for my players to succeed, and instead, I tend to go for some of these other fail states. But it's always one there, because certain situations do have a pure just You fail or you succeed. There is just those kinds of situations in life, and as such, will come up in your roleplay. So, it's still a thing here for you as a GM to decide, no, you failed to defuse that bomb, there is no second chances, bomb explodes. Then we have other sort of states, like soft failures, which, a soft failure, allows you to maybe make further attempts, but you might need to think of a new way of doing things, apply different skills, and get creative with skills you haven't yet used to try and resolve the challenge. Then there's risky failures. So, comes into play where you have something to lose, basically, take advantage of if the challenge has failed. So, for example, the example in the book is if you try to fix a Valkyrie hastily and you fail your repair roll, you might take damage from the electricity or have a tool to break. This is basically where it's risk. There's consequences that something from failing the challenge will come back and bite your character. So this could be damage, this could be further complications, this could be, you try to fix the Robotech in this example, but instead, now you've broken something else in the Robotech trying to fix that one thing. You tried to fix your thrusters and you broke your targeting, so now you're in your next combat, you're flying okay, but you're not shooting as well. And you're going to take hindrances to that, because now you accidentally broke your targeting, so various states of play there. And then there's also sticky challenges, where something bad is associated with attempting it, and in all cases, no matter what, typically that problem, that side effect, is going to be applied unless you can get enough successes to both succeed and mitigate whatever bad thing would happen. And then there's mixed successes as another possible state for GMs to use. So, all very simple. And these are just codifying various different roleplay tools that GMs tend to naturally use. You set your challenge, and you decide what happens if they fail it, and this is just guidance for GMs. So, all simple stuff to other RPGs. Now, when it comes to setting a skill challenge, the GM will typically, they'll decide the challenge, they'll set a difficulty number, and then they'll decide the time frame. And the time frame will be, how long does this take to accomplish? Because there's no 6-second rounds, 10-second rounds, 15-second rounds here in Robotech. It's things take as long as they take to accomplish within the narrative fiction. So if you, in your round, want to do something that will take, an hour to do so, based on what you've told the GM what you want to do, GM will say, alright, that will take an hour to do so, and he will say either that's going to consume this whole round, or that's going to bleed over into multiple rounds with multiple challenges. And so, there's everything from instant, moments, seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, Now, there's other things that you can do as part of challenges for a GM. This includes challenges over time, where you're asking the players to make a series of skill tests and tallying their total successes towards a really high number in order to bypass a ongoing challenge, an ongoing obstacle. There's also follow-through checks you could ask for, where it's like, okay, you succeeded at that, but, you opened the door, you hacked it, but now you have to try and hold it open long enough for the players to get through during this next round. So now you're going to have to roll again in order to do that, so it's that. The next thing I'm just going to talk about, this is a note for both players and GMs. This is something that players need to be aware of, as it's an often overlooked rule on page 60, called sacrifice. Sacrifice is something that the players can do where, should they fail a challenge, they may sacrifice things that they have, either HP, like equipment, gear. They may sacrifice it and destroy it in order to gain a number of successes that the GM thinks that sacrifice might be worth. You can make any number of sacrifices. But either way, how the sacrifice resolves is you tell the GM, I'm going to sacrifice my gun and my comms kit in order to jam this door to keep it open. And the GM will then decide, based on that narrative reasoning and whatever narrative reasoning you've already used for your skill roll, whether or not he will give you any additional successes to count towards your total for meeting the difficulty number that he has set. The GM does not have to give you any additional successes for your sacrifice if he thinks the sacrifice is pointless and doesn't work in the fiction. Which means it is a gamble. It is a gamble upon which the player can destroy something they own to potentially succeed, or they could simply just end up losing that stuff, and it can be in vain. So, there is that. But it is an excellent power that players have access to, and GMs should remind players of. Now, in terms of GMs, going into stuff, now, there's an example on page 60 about various difficulty challenges. Typically, 1 success is considered like super basic, 2 successes is like a moderate challenge, 3 is hard, 4 is expert, 5 is astonishingly hard. Now, quite often in a lot of cases, unless you're really slamming on hindrances and the players aren't using their narrative fiction or justifying their skills right, this is just a guide. You should typically, I find, set your difficulties higher, because players really attempting to maximize their successes will blow away some of these very easily. So there's that to be in mind. Unless you're really slamming on the GM prerogative to say, no, I don't believe that those skills work, I don't buy your narrative fiction, then often you should probably set moderate to be like 3, hard to be 4, very hard to be like 5, and astonishing to be 6. Just in my personal experience. But of course, these are just guidelines. Now, I'm not going to cover heroic moves, which are on page 61, during this video. There will be a separate video for heroic moves and being heroic. Suffice to say, if you're not a fan of your players being protagonists in a mecha anime, there are optional rules within the core Macross book to allow you to create a more, down-to-earth, gritty experience, such as if you really want to capture, things from certain other mecha anime, like 8th MS Team or Muv-Luv, where players will die brutally, quickly, and horribly in between mecha combats. There's options for that. If they are a protagonist, like their Max, their Ben, their, Amuro, their Char, the core rules are designed for that. Now, let's talk about skills themselves. So, going into this, let's bring up someone as an example. Let's look at Locke here. Now, if you're familiar with this, you should see our previous video in which we designed Locke as a level 1 character. Now, Locke here has started with the simple, basic 6 skills. So, he's got Alpha Strike, Ambush Tactics, Close Quarters, Escape Artist, Cover Your Buddy, and Man at Arms. And then we have the benefits, we have the cost, and the value. Now, to contextualize this into something that will easily make sense, let's present 3 different possible types of challenges. Let's just say they're all standard challenges, right? The first one is a very simple, there is a man who is attacking Locke with a knife. This is a simple combative challenge. And the GM has decided not to, whether or not they've decided to oppose roll or just set a difficulty for this, you want to disarm him. So for Locke, I'm going to say, what I want to do with Locke, as this guy's coming at me, is I want to disarm him by getting in close, grabbing his wrist, throwing him over me in a typical, fashion, and then I want to jerk his wrist to make him throw the knife, and then I'm going to, rest my knee straight on his prone body to lock him down. And so I'm going to use Escape Artist as my first skill. And you can use 1 to 2 skills for every sort of skill thing. And we're just using 2 skills for now. I'm going to use Escape Artist, which benefit is that I'm able to escape a situation or escape something that's problematic at the cost of being aware of my surroundings. I'm aware that he's got a knife. I know everything that's around me. where, you know, just in this empty alley. So there's that. Or the GM might decide it's going to cost me my awareness because I'm strictly focused on this. And then so the escape element, and then I'm going to use close quarters because it's personal, and close range, keeping that in mind, which is going to give me 5 dice, which I'm then going to just simply roll just my 5 dice, and I got 1 success, so the GM would probably decide that, yeah, I try to do that, and as I get into close range, ready to, like, avoid his knife and basically redirect his force down onto the ground, instead, he turns out this guy sees it coming, deflects my own attempts to grab, and shanks the knife into my side, breaking a piece of my armor and getting through and inflicting some damage to me. That is a very simple example of a combative skill challenge. Super easy. Now, in terms of what I could have done to improve that is I could, like, with Locke here, he's got numerous talents that he could use to attempt to increase the successes. I could argue that if I'm alone, I'm in my lone wolf element, which might bump me down to edge, in which case I would have scored 2 additional successes, which would roll me up to 3 successes. I could have sacrificed something, so on and so forth. But let's go for now a different kind of skill challenge. Say I'm still playing Locke, but the GM presents to me the classic closed door problem. You know, there's a door, it's locked, it's electrically locked, I gotta try and there's things to go about it. Now, I'm Locke. I'm not a very technical-minded character. I might say that to the GM, alright, what I want to do is I want to try and rip off the panel, rip into the various cables there, pull them out, break them, and then start, like, trying to tap together and hotwire this thing to open the door in front of me for me to get through. And the GM might say, alright, what skills are you going to use to do that? And I'll say, I'm going to use Alpha Strike for, like, punching through the panel and ripping it apart and getting in there, and, you know, because I want to get this thing open, and it's at the cost of being weakened and distracted. And then I'm just going to use my Man-at-Arms, because I've got experience, I've been around, like, I've seen numerous, you know, times Guppy or some other tech, some random guy has tried to hack these doors. So maybe I picked something up from that. And in that case, I am going up to 6 dice, but the GM might say, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Those skills might work, but I'm not experienced in this, so I'm already not in my element, but my skills are so far out there, or the fact that this is such a difficult task, and this is something very technical-minded, which, you know, I've established in the fiction of my character that I'm not a tech guy. I'm a bruiser. That this is not something that I'm going to be particularly good at. So he's going to give me a hindrance for trying to do it this way. So what I'll do is I'll roll my 6 dice, and I got 0 successes this time. Unfortunate. Wow, that's a lot of 4s. Anyway. Now, conversely, I might say I want to open the door a different way to the GM. Instead, I'm going to say, instead of trying to do anything technical with it, I'm going to try and smash my way through this door. I'm going to use, for example, my Gallant to just try and shoot out key points in the door to make a breach in it. And then try and, like, pull it and force it open with my bare hands and all my strength. And to do so, I'm going to use Close Quarters and Alpha Strike, which will give me 5 dice. And the GM might say, alright, that's probably more in keeping with how my character behaves. So it'll just be normal, and I'll roll at that with my 5 dice. And I get no successes again, because roll 20, but that is that, right? And that's the example of using it in using my skills in a technical space. And then what about the third sort of kind of, a third type of skill test? For example, something social, where I'm in the middle of a ball, but don't ask me why Locke's in the middle of a ball, just go with it. Locke is in the middle of a ball, and everyone's sort of doing stuff, and the other players are trying to get upstairs and, like, infiltrate. One of the guys here, say, like a corrupt town mayor, they're trying to go through his mansion, and they need a distraction at this party. I'm going to go forth with Locke and say, I'm going to immediately interrupt and barge into the conversation with the mayor and his associates, and I'm going to start hurling insults and accusations. I'm going to make this loud and confunctious. I'm going to scream at the top of my lungs that the mayor is like committing all sorts of crimes, true or not true. I'm just going to make it up on the spot and just start barging in there and screaming. And the GM might go, okay, what skills are you using? To which I'll then say, I'm going to use Alpha Strike, as I'm going to barge in there and just try and get everyone's attention and distract everyone. And it's going to leave me, weakened in the state of, I'm spitting shit. Everyone knows I'm spitting shit, but I've got their attention. And then I'm going to use Cover Your Buddy, because I'm doing this to sort of aid my fellows who are nearby trying to, sneak away. And so, I've got my 5 dice. I'm still not in my element, because this is definitely not something that Locke is good at. The fact that I maybe put that Locke is quite solemn and not very talkative in my character description, the GM might give me a hindrance, but assuming the GM is very polite, I would once again roll, and I got 3 dice. And maybe that's enough to distract everyone and to let my fellow players get upstairs. Maybe it's not. Maybe some people spot them. Maybe I fail completely as guards notice, I get kicked out, things go bad, who knows. But the point is, in that these 3 examples, any skill can be used for any kind of test. So, the trick with this system, when applying your skills, is to be as creative as possible. Now, the skills all have various guidelines in the core book to try and help you, various examples. The cost-benefit is there to help you justify it. It's not a hard and fast thing. It is there to guide you in thinking about how to use this skill in various examples. You can achieve anything. A pilot isn't just a pilot. They're not just got skills like dodge, parry, whatever. No. It comes down to creatively how I'm going to do it. And the thing is, the same way in which you apply skills to regular challenges is also applied the same in combat, where once again, you'll tell the GM what you're doing, how you're doing it, what skills you're justifying for that, which will give you your value in dice, in D6, to roll, which the GM will then apply various penalties or modifiers. Now let's talk for a moment about the modifiers for GMs and players. So, on most character sheets, there's a nice little chart here, and this helps represent the modifiers. So, there's basically +1 modifiers, +2 modifiers, -1 modifiers, and -2 modifiers. Now, these modifiers can all cancel each other out. So, for example, I might try and do something in melee while I have a hindrance from not using a proper melee weapon, but because I'm in my element, I'm going to cancel that out with a bonus. So, I'll end up back at hindrance. Or, for example, I might really lay out my careful plans, I might be in my element, I might have the proper gear that the GM agrees with, I might be working in coordination with players, and that might bring me down to, to advantage, in which case I am super geared to go, and I'm likely to get a lot of successes. And so, based on the skill modifiers, that the GM will give you, which should be determined based on the narrative fiction, like I just described. So, depending on how you've described you're going to go about doing something, the GM will then decide if it warrants any hindrances or benefits. If you do something very smart, and you're very creative, the GM might say, yes, that's an excellent idea, have advantage. If not, the GM might say, that is a horrible idea, this player character isn't going to respond very well to insults. For example, if we go to the previous example that I spoke about for the social conflict, where Locke burst in and just insulted a bunch of people, the GM might go, that's a bad way of going about it. Because you're a stranger, they're just going to assume something's up. Instead, if I went and said, I'm going to go up to the mayor and to cause a scene, I'm going to start basically, like, you know, blowing smoke up him and praising him and doing all sorts of stuff and, like, raising a cheer to him and, you know, stroking his ego, the GM might go, that's a bit more appropriate for this fancy formal environment that's all about him, and so that's more than likely to distract him a hell of a lot more. So he might give me an edge for that. So it all comes down to player creativity. And you're supposed to talk about this real quick with your GM. You know, they can give you feedback and stuff as much as they want to. For you, GM, it's up to your style if you want to give good feedback or no feedback to players. Whether you want to be like, okay, you can give it a shot, and then secretly apply modifiers, or if you tell them, yes, absolutely, that's a great idea, have an edge, or no, that's a terrible idea, have a hindrance. Oh, okay, if that's giving me a hindrance, can I try something else? Sure, what do you got? Okay, well, and instead of that, I think I'll just, you know, shoot out all the lights. Alright, cool. You'll have nominal of that. So that's the general back and forth of coming to the resolutions of these. Now, one of the core things that will give any sort of bonus to your skill checks, whether in and out of combat, because this system applies to both, is your elements. Now, elements basically represent your character's field of expertise, the situation fictionally in which they are in, quite literally, their element, where they are performing their best. Now, you always get one element during character creation. There are multiple ways to get other different elements as you go on. So, in this case, I have Lone Wolf on lock, which means the Lone Wolf element is defined by my character being in their element, and thus gaining a bonus, +1 bonus, going to edge, when he is operating alone without the support of friendlies. So, the more Locke does stuff without the help of the rest of the party, the better he is. Others might be the reverse of this. There might be people who are in their element, such as ace pilots, when they're specifically battling other mecha. There might be wingmen who are in their element when they are supporting other allies during a mecha combat. There's assaulters who are in their element when they are just in the thick of combat, regardless whether it's mecha or not. They are if they are in the thick of trouble, they are in their element. There's spies with like the shade nature who are in their element as a shade when they are stalking a target without being seen. Entertainers are in their element when they are, you know, quite literally, through some means or another, entertaining other people. So, there's various other things. Great examples of elements also include the technician career, which its three basic ones are like scientist. Its three basic elements are scientist, doctor, and engineer. And like those are almost self-explanatory. As a technician who's got the engineer element, you are in your element when you're working with electricals and mechanicals, when you're trying to fix something or involve something that, you know, isn't something like biology, like the doctor, or something super theoretical, like the scientist. Now, if you have the core book, pages 64 through to, like, goes all the way to 75, contain all the core skills and examples on how to use them. So don't be afraid to really consult those. But it is all about your imagination and you bringing to life the anime story that you're envisioning. Be cinematic, be dramatic, and the general idea is to weave what you're doing into the roleplay and use your roleplay to justify with your skills how you're going to succeed at something. Now, in our next video, we'll be looking directly at the applications of skills and combat, and we'll be looking at some example basic combats. Now, that is a bit more kettle of fish, so it'll probably be a longer thing, and there's still various elements that we haven't covered. But we will cover those in due course. For now, I've been Jay from Jade Productions. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next part.